Welcome everybody. Wow, this is quite the robust turnout. So I just want to start with a grateful heart. Thank you all for coming out. I'm thinking of my friend Joanne over here from Northport Journal. She shared with me when she comes to these events and she sees people that she knows, she's like, oh, I kind of like you more now. So anyway, well, where to start? My name is Liz, and well, thank you. So, and I've said this before, and I'll say it again and again, I love storytelling, right? And in particular, moth-style storytelling. So I guess by a show of hands, who here is familiar with moth-style storytelling? Wow, awesome. We got some educated moths. Yes, I love that. But I do like to kind of share the basic parameters of what moth-style storytelling is, just so everyone's on the same page and, for the folks that are not familiar with the moth. So I like to call it's the 4 T's. And actually, since our last event, I added an additional T, so now it's the 5 T's. So I'll go through that. And I know, Eric, if I forget one of the T's, I'm talking to you, Eric. Just a little audience participation, keep me on track. So the first T is the stories are true. They are true personal stories. It's a lived experience that the storyteller experienced, and so that it's from their perspective. So first, they're true. Second, they're told. So we've been kind of liberal with that in the past, where folks have read their stories, but we've really moved towards being, I don't know, for lack of a better term, strict with that, right? This is about, for me, human connection. So kind of like shedding any of the barriers is key. So if you're reading a piece of paper, there is a little bit of a barrier. Those stories can be beautiful and wonderful, but for moth-style storytelling, they're told. So then they're timed. Okay. So the way I've done it is for the planned storytellers, they could be no less than 5 minutes and no more than 12 minutes. So to help keep time, we have our storytelling partner here, Annie Mark. Everyone say hello to Annie Mark. So when we get to 10 minutes, if the storyteller gets to 10 minutes, Annie's going to play a little soft note. Okay, we like it gentle. And then at 11 minutes, 30 seconds, you'll hear all right, and then at 12 minutes, okay, all right, you got it? All right, so that's the first hit. Okay, so that's when you know your time's up. So that's the first half. Yep, I love it. All right, so the 4th T is transformation, right? So there has to be some change in the storyteller. And really that's what creates the arc. So the storyteller, they start their story, and by the end of the story, they're changed somehow. There's 2 seats over here, Patty. There's seats over here, Eric. 2 up here. Come on up. And David, for you too, there's seats. So there's a transformation that takes place. It doesn't have to be some epic transformation. It can be, but it's not necessary. It could be subtle, but there's some change that happens. And now, so there's the 5th T, right? And that's theme. All our storytelling events involve a theme, right? Where the storytellers, they craft their stories around. So tonight's theme is fear, which kind of brings me to what storytelling is not. And storytelling, well, this style of storytelling is not preaching, right? Like, I love a good preaching on Sunday, but for these purposes, it is not about preaching. It's not even about teaching. With teaching, there's sort of an agenda. This storytelling is simply a human being coming up, sharing with others about an experience that they had and letting the listener in and revealing themselves. And why this kind of loops into the theme tonight is because what makes memorable stories is when the storyteller is vulnerable and they reveal a piece of themselves and they share it generously with the other human beings that are listening. That can stir up some fear. But I have discovered through storytelling the paradox of that is that when you do reveal that place, when you kind of get beyond the dragons that exist, you get to that treasure. And the more personal and vulnerable it is, the more universal it happens to be. And that is when connection takes place. And that's what drives me to do this. This is why I'm interested in storytelling. That's why I love the Moth. And that's why I held my first event back in 2021. And lastly, it kind of brings me to the place of you as listeners. You're not learning, you might learn, you're not students, you're just up here, you're witnessing. And that, to me, I just want to acknowledge that is a cherished role, really and truly. So I just kind of want to note that. And then, you raising your hand? Oh, okay. I'm like, am I my teacher now? Okay, so what's up, Tiffany? All right, so I just want to do some like housekeeping items, right? So the bathrooms, I guess the men they can use the bathroom that's beyond that door right to the right, and then there's another bathroom over here. And then like whatever's left there's a bathroom upstairs. And then, the beverages and snacks are complimentary. Please help yourself. We also we're selling brownies. The funding from the sale of the brownies are going towards Project Dignity, okay? And also a portion of the proceeds tonight will go towards that as well. And those are for care packages, I guess you can call them, for women that are re-entering civilization after coming out of jail. So it's like a care package to give them some dignity and support and love after they've served their time. So that's what that's about. And the last thing I wanted to share, maybe not the last thing, but I did want to share that just so you know what to expect for tonight, right? So the first half of the show, there's going to be 5 planned storytellers. And then after the 5th one, we're going to break. We'll have a couple of minutes. And then we're going to do this. We're changing up the format. Gretchen, we talked about this, right? So you all had an opportunity to put your name in a hat. And I'm going to pull out like 5 to 6 names. Whoever gets selected, you have 5 minutes to come up and tell a story based on the theme of fear. So there's going to be a little spontaneity, a little bit of unexpected, like, I don't know what they're going to say. If you say something crazy, please don't blame me. So I think that covers it for now. And we're going to dive into storytelling. Any questions? Like, are you all comfortable? Can you hear me back there? Everybody can hear okay? The audio is good? Okay, cool. All right, so like I said, we have 5 storytellers. Our first storyteller, all right, Chris Pressler. Everybody welcome Chris Pressler. Thanks.
It was September 11th, 2018. I had just come home from work, and that night, a documentary that I had edited, had been working on for 3 to 4 months, was to be airing on television. I was very happy. When I got home, my wife, who was 6 months pregnant at the time, was hanging out there, and we were enjoying some smiles together because we were building our son's room in our very, very, very tiny second bedroom in our Brooklyn apartment. And as I was building things and moving things around, one of the bookshelves that I had recently built was kind of in the middle of the room, and I said, that needs to go to the corner. So I went and pushed it to the corner, and the next thing I knew, I woke up on the ground 2 minutes later. And what had happened was a Himalayan rock salt lamp was on top of that bookshelf, fell, hit me on the head, and knocked me out. And had a big goose egg, was very dizzy. But I said, okay, let's pull up our bootstraps. We have a big important night tonight. So I went over to my friend Casey's. We watched my documentary. I was in a bit of a haze, somewhat ruined the experience, but I said, okay, it is what it is. Over the next 2 weeks, I was increasingly getting dizzier and dizzier, and I didn't know really what was going on. And one night, I woke up, and there was paramedics right above me. And I heard, Mr. Pressler, Mr. Pressler, Mr. Pressler. And I just look up and I say, what's going on? What's happening? Mr. Pressler, you had a seizure. You were seizing for about 5 minutes, and your wife called us. I said, okay. So you have to go to the hospital. And got me into the ambulance, got to the hospital. Doctor said, listen, it could be a one-off thing. People have seizures all the time. Sometimes it just happens. I went over to my friend Casey's. We watched my documentary. I was in a bit of a haze. Come back. Somewhat ruined the experience. Have a diagnosis for you. I didn't really know what they were talking about, but went home. I was still a bit dizzy. And 2 days later, I wake up in the middle of the night. There's paramedics there again. And I'm now back at the hospital. So I speak with the resident neurologist, and he said, unfortunately, when you have more than one seizure, you're diagnosed with epilepsy. And I said, well, how could this be? What are you talking about? He said, did something happen in the last month? I said, well, yeah, I had this incident with a lamp. And they said, well, that's what happened. You had a traumatic brain injury that left you with epilepsy. So I went to a very, very dark place because I kept having seizures and seizures and seizures constantly, 3, 4, 5 a day. And I would wake up dizzy. The whole day was just a veil of dizziness and seizures. And my wife is now 8 months pregnant. And it's getting worse and worse and worse. And I'm falling into a hole because the doctors are trying Depakote, they're trying Keppra, they're trying all these different anticonvulsants, and they're just not working. Some of them made me cry, some of them made me sick, and none of them took my seizures away. So I started self-medicating with alcohol and marijuana, and that took me into an even deeper hole. So now my wife had our child. He's about 2 weeks old, and I am in the deepest depression I've ever been. And I'll remember that my wife had just finished breastfeeding our child, and I remember looking over to her and saying, I'm not going to commit suicide, but I would be okay with not being here anymore. Because I couldn't get out of my head. I couldn't get this thing that implanted itself in my brain. I couldn't get it out. So I kept going back and forth with my epileptologist, who would hook these things up to my brain, and I would be in the hospital, and they would monitor my brain and monitor my seizures. And I kept saying, look, you guys aren't giving me medication. You're not giving me what I need. That's why I'm smoking. That's why I'm drinking. That's why I'm eating terribly. And I gained 25 pounds, and I was at my very worst. I was not a father. I was just existing like a piece of coal sitting on the ground. I wasn't contributing anything. And I remember my epileptologist she said, you're on a path right now that you are gonna die, because what you're doing is you're feeding your seizures. Seizures need fatty foods. Seizures need alcohol. Seizures need mind-altering substances so that your brain synapses can bounce all over the place. That's what it wants. The only way you're going to figure this out is if you go on a ketogenic diet, if you stop drinking, you stop smoking, and you start exercising, and you take this very seriously. So that's what I did. I turned my life around. I started exercising constantly. I started eating really good. And we eventually started to get my medication correct. So I went from having a seizure every day to a seizure every 2 days, seizure every 3 days, one seizure every week, now a seizure every month. And I'll always remember that I reached a 3-month mark there where I hadn't had a seizure, and I just woke up and I was like, I can't believe this. Like I've reached some sort of clarity here. And I went into my room, and under my bed was where that rock salt lamp was. And I reached down and I ripped out the electric guts from it so that it was just the rock salt. And me, my wife, and my son went to Jones Beach, and I took that piece of shit rock and I threw it with all my might into the water, and I just released that burden from myself, because I knew that I was on the path to success. And I have to take 17 pills a day now for the rest of my life to make sure that my brain doesn't convulse. But I'm fully cognitive. I didn't lose any memories or anything. I'm here. I'm with it, and I'm succeeding, and I'm doing awesome. And it's been 3 years since I've had a seizure, and I'm killing it. I really am. I'm killing it. So what I always like to say is, I'm Chris Pressler, and I have epilepsy, but epilepsy doesn't have me.
And so, yeah, everyone, please, Annie, when I first started this in 2021, I put out a call for storytellers. I was like, what the heck, let's do it. Because I love the Moth, and I didn't want to travel into Brooklyn anymore, and I wanted to have something here local. So that's when I did my first storytelling event. I put out a call for storytellers, and the first responses I got, one was Annie Mark, and the other one was David Rivera, who's here. Hi, David. And so Annie Mark, she just blew my world when the first story that she told. And I think what happens for me, when, I love the stories, I momentarily fall in love with the storytellers. I just do. And I fell in love with Annie. So she's my girl. So everyone, please give a warm welcome to Annie. Mark. And the title of her story is Mother Fear and the Big Afraid.
Okay. Mother Fear and the Big Afraid. I'll go back before motherhood. I don't know if I was born afraid, but from the time I was really little that I can remember, I was afraid of so many things. I was afraid of loud noises. My father would have to take me out of places if the noises got too loud. I was afraid of the dark. I was afraid of speaking. I was afraid of any oral reports in school. That would terrify me. I'd rather write a 10-page paper than speak in front of people. I was afraid of the train, the gap between the platform and stepping on the train, that it would suck me under. And I was afraid of escalators. And, and I wouldn't ride an escalator. So, I came to fear pretty young. But jump ahead, my first memory of mother fear, I was pregnant with my son. And my whole pregnancy, you read about what to expect when you're expecting, the movement, the first flutter, I felt nothing the whole pregnancy, except for the last 2 weeks. No movement, no flutter, no nothing. So every time I would go to the doctor, the obstetrician, I would say, can you make sure, I found out I was having a son from the sonogram, can you make sure he's okay? I don't feel anything, nothing. And he's like, he would do the check, he would listen to his heartbeat. He's got a good strong heartbeat. Maybe he just doesn't like to move. But every time the fear would come up and I would be like, so. And going back to the fear, even through my whole life, I had my son when I was 33. Part of my motto was feel the fear and do it anyway. I was afraid of learning how to drive on the parkway. I was afraid of, so I would do things just because, and I'm a songwriter. I wanted to play in front of people. I would do it anyway, even though I'd be terrified. But jump ahead to, motherhood and that first mother fear. When my son was almost 2 years old, I started doing a book called The Artist's Way, which is it is a book about opening the doors to your own creativity. And it has all these, it's a workbook and it has all these practices. And I dove into that with both feet. My son wasn't even 2 yet. And it literally changed my life. And Julia Cameron wrote it. And on the side of all the pages were these quotes. And one of the quotes that blew me away, and I felt it in my gut, was, nothing has a more profound impact on the life of a child than the unlived life of a parent. And through the years, I would be afraid. My son was very active. He was climbing trees. He was Spider-Man. He was Superman. He was Indiana Jones. He loved to climb, and he fell out of a tree, broke both his wrists. Every gray hair I have that I naturally get natural highlights for are from those. Anyway, he had broken bones, stitches, stop my heart kind of fear. And, I had a spiritual life that I would turn other things over, but my mothering, I kept control of, and my worry and fear for my son and his life. And I tried to I would tell him, I want you to have a big life, Zach. I want you to have a big life. And what does that mean? I wanted him to experience things and not be so afraid. So, jump ahead. And my son is 22. And him and his girlfriend are planning a 10-day trip to the Dominican Republic. And they are piecemealing this trip back when Airbnb was a lot less expensive. And they're keeping the costs down, and they're telling me all these things. They're booking a private, a boat where it's a private person and a car that they're renting from some woman in the Dominican Republic, and they're doing all these things, and I'm like, what are you doing? And then right at that time, there's a news thing that is coming about the dangers of tourism in the Dominican Republic. People are being kidnapped and robbed and murdered, and alcohol bottles are being laced with things. And I'm like, Zach, maybe you should rethink this trip. And he's like, what are you talking about? We already paid for this. We're not worried. And so he's going to the Dominican Republic. The same time, I am booked to go to North Carolina to finish up a training with this kind of transformative breath work that I've been learning about and teaching and holding classes for myself. And in the beautiful mountains of North Carolina, we're going to be gone the same amount of time, and there's going to be a retreat. And so he goes off to the Dominican Republic, and I head to North Carolina, and I am beside myself with it. I call it the big afraid because I was so afraid. I could barely be present with my classmates for the classes. And part of the breathwork training was about receiving the healing for myself. So I was very honest with my classmates and my teachers, and I was saying, I'm so scared that something's going to happen. And I'll backtrack a little bit. I do have, like, part of my big afraid, part of it is also, in my own family, there's been some very sudden tragic things. My son's father died very suddenly when he was 3, unexpectedly. My nephew. I mean, so it was like piled on my own regular mother fear. And so I bring it to my classmates, and they suggest that when I go and experience the breath work, that I bring my fear with me. My fear, my terror, that I'm not really even able to be present for this workshop that I, signed up for and that I love doing. And I go into this breath work that is very transformative and changes, it brings me beyond my own regular consciousness and brings some clarity. And in this breath work, I see myself hovering over my son with what looks like claws embedded in his shoulders, holding him down, holding him prisoner. And I'm realizing in the breath work, I'm not only holding him prisoner, but I am also a prisoner to this fear. And I come out of that breath work and I'm like, oh my God, and even in the breath work and dreams before that, I was dreaming of Natalie Holloway and Aruba and her missing. And it was just like, and I realized, like, my worry and my fear, holding him down, holding myself from living my life. And my classmates and the teacher was like, what do you want to do? I said, I want to free myself and free him. So I asked one of my classmates to be my son. And I actually did the thing that I saw in my breath work. And I put my claws or whatever in her shoulders. And then I removed my claws from his shoulders. And I felt the biggest exhale and just felt like freed up from that fear. And I realized, like, my worry and my fear weren't going to keep my son safe. None of that is going to keep him safe. Bad things happen, bad things can happen. But that wasn't going to keep him safe. And I needed to free myself and him. And, that retreat, the end of that breath work was over. And I get a text from my son. And in the text is this picture of him swimming in the ocean with dolphins with the most pure look of joy on his face. And I'm like, you can't make that up. And I'm like, that's what I want for him. I want him to have that. I want him to have that. And I'd like to say that my mother fear is gone. And all of that is gone. But he just moved away. It's his birthday today. He turned 30 today. And he just moved away to teach school with his fiance in Orlando. And he shared with me that the neighborhood, the district that he's in, is not such a great neighborhood. It's not so safe felt the mother fear rise back up. I'm not cured. I need to practice all the time. So again, I needed to take my claws out of him and let him have his life and let myself have my own life. And that's my story.
Thank you, Liz. Feels like yesterday I was walking down a very long hallway. It was cold. The color of the walls was puke green. And each door was metal. And I was maybe about 26 years old. I was walking with a bunch of social workers and doctors and lawyers and mental health professionals. And we had a long list of questions to ask. And as we were walking down the hallway, I was very aware that I was being watched. There were cameras, there were officers. And where I was going was to talk to women in a correctional facility in New York City that no longer exists. It got wiped out during Hurricane Sandy. But I was going down a corridor of people who were in their cells 23 hours out of the day. And as I walked, I just picked a cell. And there was a little slot, tiny slot, like a mailbox slot. And a tiny little window, and the cell was 6 by 9. I could see in the window that there was nothing in that cell. There was a metal bed, a tiny mattress, flat, no sheets, no clothes, nothing I could see in the cell. And when I peered and opened the little slot to talk, what I saw was a woman who was so young, 16, 17, 18. And her hair was disheveled, and she had a kind of crumpled t-shirt on and a pair of sweatpants. And I knew I had all these questions to ask her. And I thought, it doesn't feel right for me to say, how are you feeling? How is your day going? And I could see she was falling to pieces, and I just wanted to reach through there and say, I was you. Because what I couldn't say to her was that when I was 20 years old, I was in a cell that looked just like that. See, I was going back in after having come home from prison. And I had spent 6 months in solitary confinement in a jail right here on Long Island. And the smell, the lack of fresh air, we'd get an orange, we'd peel the orange peels and put them right on the ledge of whatever was there, just to make the room smell better. And I desperately wanted to tell her, I am you. I know what you're going through. But I couldn't. So I went through some of the questions, and I wished her well and continued on to the rest of the interviews we were going to be doing. And fast forward 10 years later, created my own nonprofit, went back into the very jail that I was incarcerated in. And this time I was going in as a director of a nonprofit, running jail programs. And I met with the sheriff, and I was sitting in his office, and then met with the deputy warden, and they said, okay, we're going to take a tour. We're going to go through this way. And I said, okay, let's go. I had my staff with me. We just finished talking about how we're going to support women who are dealing with mental health issues and other things. And we went from his office around the corner, down a hallway that I had never been before because I was on the other side of that wall. And when I got there, I suddenly realized that the gallery I was in, with a big, huge bubble around it, with officers up above you, I realized that was the place that I had been at 20 years old when they fingerprinted me and I had just been sentenced. That was the same spot. And I looked around and I immediately remembered the officer, because they're fingerprinting your hands, they're taking your finger and fingerprinting you. And he said, "Oh, you got your nails done to come to jail? Really?" I had purple mauve nail polish on. I knew I was going to be sentenced, and I didn't know how the hell I was going to make it through that jail time. But I figured if I got my nails done, maybe the color, that calming purple light lilac, would give me a little peace. And when he said that, it was like my heart dropped, because I felt ashamed, I felt embarrassed, I already felt awful. But then I really shouldn't have gotten my nails done to go to jail. What was I thinking? And we continued through, and I had this memory and just kept walking along and never shared it with anybody. And then I remember sitting and talking with legislators in New York State, up in Albany, meeting before senators and assembly members, and sitting there telling why women deserve dignity, why babies shouldn't be taken away from their mothers when they're born behind bars. Because babies don't know that they're in prison, they know they're with their mom. And as I gave testimony, I saw the eyes of the senators and the assembly members, and I finally felt like I had found my home. I had found a way for me to express what I had been through and to help other women. And coming home after a 13-hour trip to Albany and back, sat down and was talking with my son, who's 14, and he said, "How was your day, and what did you do?" And part of what I talked to him about is the fact that I can't change my past, I can't change what happened to me, I can't change what I was involved in, but I sure damn well can change my future, and I can support other women, and I can begin the journey of hope and healing. And guess what? I can still wear mauve nail polish.
Another one, my goodness, we got a strong lineup tonight. That was like a true, that's like a Shiro's, right? Shiro's journey. Beautiful. Thank you, Serena. Thank you. All right, so our last planned storyteller we have is coming up next. I'm really excited about our next storyteller, and he is actually why I selected Fear. Well, it was a couple of months ago, I found out that a film was playing at the Huntington Cinema Arts Center during their film festival, and a friend of mine said to me, "There's this documentary film called Humanity Stoked that's playing down at the Huntington Cinema Arts Center, and it's really about kind of looking through the world through the lens of like skateboarders." And well, I don't know, I've shared this before. I had started digging into starting a program for youth to expose them to skateboarding and scooter riding. So I was like, I definitely have to check this out. I went down to the Huntington Cinema Arts Center. I saw this film. I'm a big documentary film fan. I watched the film and I was totally moved throughout the film, and Michael will share. Much of the themes were around fear and overcoming it. So I talked to him afterwards, and at one point he said, if you do a story event with the theme of fear, I'll come and I'll tell a story. So there you have it. Everybody welcome Michael Ian Cohen. Thank you.
Hey everybody. First of all, thank you all for coming out and listening to these inspirational stories. That means a lot to me, that people care about such things. And thank you for coming out to hearing my story. And my story is an inspirational story, but I hope that it is also, in a way, can serve as a cautionary tale, if you will, as much as an inspirational tale. And my story is the story of a man who next year will hopefully turn 60 years old. And unlike many of the times in my life, I can honestly say that I'm glad my life isn't over at this very moment. And over the last 8 years of my life, I've lived through a period of great growth and change, and being honest with myself about what I had done and how much time I had squandered 4 decades of my life. Squandered, not really spending a day trying to do anything to make dreams come true, dreams that were profoundly important to me since I was maybe 12 or 13 years old. And in learning to lean into my own vulnerabilities, both present vulnerabilities and also understanding them, the vulnerabilities of my life and of my past and how I got there. And I was fortunate in a way that at 13 years old, I knew exactly what I wanted to do with my life, was to become an inspirational filmmaker and to become a humanitarian, even though I had no idea what that term meant, but to try and do something with my life that would inspire people, to try and make a positive difference in the lives of people all around me. But instead of doing any of those things, I decided to live a life of fear-based procrastination and fear-based decision-making that was engineered as a defense mechanism to keep me safe from the things that I feared, which largely had to do with interpersonal issues of betrayal and fearing people, fearing being embarrassed, fearing being betrayed, teased, or tormented. And it took a long time until I was near 50, in the midst of a catastrophic depression that lasted almost 2 years, that I had a series of epiphanies and realizations that helped me change my life around, and eventually did, as you already know, become a filmmaker and started a children's foundation. And it's been really an incredible journey to have gone through that. And the last 3 years of my life have been miraculous. I've been living in a fantasy version, a life that I envisioned for myself when I was a little kid. And I've been fortunate enough to travel the world in film festivals and in Finland and Germany and South Africa and from New Hampshire to Hawaii, and to showcase this documentary, which is largely, even though, as you heard, has an element of skateboarding in it, it's largely about fear and the various problems that they create and exacerbate in people's lives. And naively, I didn't realize this, but when I used to look at movie posters and I would see the laurels on those movie posters with various film festivals, and it would say this film festival official selection, that film festival official selection, not winner. And I thought naively, how stupid. Why are they advertising the film festivals that they clearly lost? Didn't understand how difficult it was, that the vast majority of people that want to become a filmmaker don't actually do that. They don't actually start to make a feature-length film, and those that do don't finish. And the small amount of those films that actually get completed get submitted to film festivals, and if they're selected, they are perhaps one or two dozen out of hundreds that were submitted. And in a mid-tier festival, they are sometimes a few dozen out of thousands, literally thousands of films that are submitted to a film festival. The thought of having been able to win one of those film festivals, not only at 50 years old, seemed crazy to me. If you had told me that I would be a filmmaker at all at 50 years old, I would have thought you were absolutely certifiably insane. It was unfathomable to me. And then here we were, now traveling the world and not only having won that coveted prize of winning a film festival, winning the best feature-length documentary of any film that got into the festival. The film actually did that 24 times, 24 film festivals in 8 countries. Unfathomable. And if you're thinking, hey, we're supposed to be talking about fear, why is this jerk bragging about his film festival success? I can assure you, I'm not a jerk, one, even though traditionally, if you have to convince people of that, you probably are one. I'm not. And I'm not bragging. I hate braggadocious people and I loathe giant egos. And I'm telling you all of this because I hope that in appreciating the grandeur of where I ended up, after wasting the first half of my life, that you can appreciate the journey of how I got there and why it took so long and how much time I had wasted. And to do that, I want to bring you back about 8 years from that point, 8 years from now, actually. Again, wouldn't believe I could become a filmmaker or start a charity or do any of these things that I've always wanted to do. And I was at a bar mitzvah. And we're on Long Island, so I'm sure you all know what a bar mitzvah is, despite us being in a church at the moment. And in the ballroom was at the time my wife and my school-age daughters. And they were dancing and singing and laughing, and I could hear all of that joyous celebration coming from that room. I, however, was down the hall, a few hundred feet, sitting in a different room. And if you're wondering why I wasn't in the ballroom, where everyone I knew was truly present, mentally, spiritually, physically, emotionally present, which was something that for me was a struggle my entire life, to be present, to feel present, and not feel detached from myself and my loved ones. I was a few hundred feet down the hall in a room alone in the dark, and what I was doing was coming to the realization that I was going to have to kill myself because I was in so much pain in the midst of a depression, and I truly believed that I would emerge from that, but just as much I believed that I would return to it, and that would be the only permanent solution. And as many people in that level of darkness and despair do, they will convince themselves that, oh, this person will be okay, my wife will be okay, because I'll unburden her from living with this disease, this pain, and she can have a life of normalcy. But then I thought of my two daughters, and I pictured them standing there dressed in black at my funeral, distraught and confused, and living with the pain of a lifetime of abandonment, not only from their father having abandoned himself, but not having loved them enough and cared about them enough to not give up on them. And that pain became so scary to me, that fear became so real, until something kind of interesting happened, that the fear of that, of hurting my daughters, which was against every fiber of my being, that the fear of that became larger than the fear of continuing to live my life in the pain I was living. And I learned a valuable lesson that, yes, of course, it's better to better understand the origins of fear and how to circumvent fear and how not to let it blow out of control. But when your life is on the line or your dreams are on the line, you can also hack fear by using it to kind of leverage a larger fear against another one that you thought was keeping you from where you want to be. And it was a lesson that I would repeat learning at times in my life. But what I really needed to do at that moment was to try and understand how I got there. And eventually I had to try and go back to what I realized was like the first major moment in my life that had sent me off on this trajectory of fear-based living. And to do that, you need to come back with me even further, back to 1968. I was 2 years old, and my family had just moved from Brooklyn to Merrick here on Long Island. And we didn't have a lot of money, though we managed to move into a house from this tiny little apartment in Brooklyn, but it was a real DIY project with station wagons and my uncles and vans and rented cars or borrowed cars, and they were moving everything out of the van and putting it on this beautiful new patio on the lawn of this house in Merrick, where I suppose the boxes and things would be sorted and then brought into the house one by one. And I was sitting on that beautiful new patio with my sister. She was 5 and I was 2. And for some reason, it was a community event. There were neighbors and their kids were there, and hustle and bustle and a lot of things going on. And what my sister didn't know at the time, and what I didn't know at the time, and what all of the people around me didn't know at the time, was that in an instant, the air would be filled with the most blood-curdling screams. And everyone around me, including myself and my sister and the friends and the patio would be splattered top to bottom in my blood. And not just my blood. This was my blood and what was left of most of the fingers and the knuckles and the skin on what was formerly my left hand. And this happened because they had brought out an exercise bicycle from the van when I was 2, and they laid it there. And one of the kids that was there decided to get on it and start pedaling. I don't know how old he is now, but I'm assuming he's presently in therapy. And he was spinning it. And so these spokes that connected to the sprocket of that wheel and the chain that wrapped around the sprocket was spinning so fast it was just a shiny blur. And in an instant, I thrust my left hand into that. And that was the end of it. And it was mayhem. And I was told I went into shock at 2 years old. And my uncles grabbed me and wrapped me in a towel and threw me in the back of the van. And my other uncle jumped in the van and beelined for the hospital. And my parents and other people followed behind in cars. And when we got to the hospital, some of them were sent back to the house to try. They were tasked with trying to find bits and pieces of my body that were salvageable, that could be put on ice, fingers, knuckles, anything, flaps of skin, put on ice and bring it to the hospital. And of course, no one was able to do that because it was a bicycle sprocket. And as I felt, as I grew up, emotionally so, I was quite literally shredded. And there was nothing they could do at that time other than to just save my life and not have me bleed out. And the way a 2-year-old copes with such trauma is to go into shock. And then in the weeks that followed, that shock evolved into what I would describe as a sustainable version of shock, where you are detached from your pain, emotional pain, mental pain, confusion, physical pain. And growing up like that, psychologists now refer to that as a form of depersonalization, where you are separated from your consciousness even. And this was something I carried into my life. This was something that affected me at that bar mitzvah, when my family and my loved ones and my friends were there, but I felt like I was behind this plate of glass, not actually present. And it became so painful for me to be in those situations. And as I grew and went to grade school, of course, that was compounded, because as you can imagine, being teased and bullied and tormented, sometimes brutally. And then at 10, when I finally had felt safe enough or familiar enough with my surroundings, my family moved to California in the middle of a school year, and everything I knew and was familiar with was yanked from me, vanished overnight, and once again in a sort of war zone to fend for myself. And in that spot in California, again being teased and tormented and also hated because I was a New Yorker in 1977. That was Kojak. I was supposed to be some street-wise, tough guy. And I ended up fighting and smoking, sometimes half a pack of cigarettes a day. And I kid you not, I was 10. And experimenting with drinking and petty thievery and shoplifting. By the time I was 20 years old, I learned really not to trust anyone, even though you wouldn't know it, because I learned how to pretend that I trusted people and felt safe. But the thought at that time of becoming a filmmaker at 20 and really putting myself out there, I had engineered my life to don't do anything that could result in me being ostracized or embarrassed or humiliated or judged or teased. And so rather than switch to a more achievable dream, I relied instead on maladaptive daydreaming, where they became satisfying just enough to become enough and not actually have to try and do anything. And so what had happened shortly after that bar mitzvah, and I'm wrapping up, I promise, was I had a premonition of myself at 90 years old on my deathbed. And in this premonition, I couldn't look at my family members in the eye, not because I was suffering from depersonalization or any type of fear. It was because I couldn't look them in the eye because I was riddled with shame, not for having failed to do any of the things that I knew were always important to me, to live my life in a way that practically reflected my value system. It was because I would have the shame of having failed to even try, having failed to even get up to bat and take a swing, to just sell myself out completely and live a fake, shallow version of a life that I knew wasn't true. And with that premonition came the realization that the fear of that potential outcome, like at the earlier time in my life, became greater than the fear of moving forward and actually taking a chance and putting myself out there and trying to do what I thought I always should be doing. And with that became an empowering vow that I made to myself, never again to let fear guide my hand and affect my decision-making and my perspectives on life, and to vow to finally start living. And with that, I bought myself a used camera, and I bought myself a round-trip ticket to Cuba, where I envisioned filming the first interview of what would be this documentary I had envisioned. And it is the actual start of the film, which hopefully you'll all get to see one day. And I got on this plane, having had a friend tell me how to operate this film camera literally 4 days before, and flew there by myself and started the film. And the rest of which is history you already know. And it all really was dependent on eventually keeping the promise to myself of what I wanted to do with my life. And I will end with this thought for you all, that many of us in the room have made promises to people, and some of us had made promises that we haven't kept because fear has held us back. And what I would say to you is that if it's fear that has held you back from making good on that promise, and especially if that promise is to yourself, please understand it's not too late, and it is way, 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 way better than never to go ahead and do that. And so I hope that you all do. So thank you. Oh, and by the way, only because I made this film for free and I'm giving every cent away in perpetuity to charity, all of the revenue, that quick plug, if you're interested in it, go to Humanity Stoked on Instagram. We're going to make some big announcements in the coming weeks and months. So thank you so much, everybody. Thank you.
All right, so we're at that time where we're gonna take a break. But as Michael was telling his story, the song Anthem by Leonard Cohen came to mind, and the lyric is, "There are cracks in everything, and that's how the light gets in." That just came to mind. And all of the storytellers, I'm super, my heart is so grateful. I hope you all feel that connection that storytelling provides, right? That's the magic of storytelling. So we're gonna take a break, probably like 10, 12, 13 minutes or so, and then we'll come back and we'll take the names out of the hat, and we'll, a couple more stories to tell. Thank you.
First this time. So, July of 2005 was a moment of truth for me. I was taking the New York bar exam. Now, after high school graduation, which was the highest level that my family expected me to go, I had no plan, no direction at all. So I went to work, and after 4 years of work, I decided I'm going to be a lawyer. So for the next 10 years, that was my mission. Go to college, go to law school, be a lawyer. What I didn't anticipate was the intense fear I'd have of the bar exam. So as most classes in law school, you get one test, and the outcome of that test determines your success. So naturally, I was petrified of this one test that would determine whether or not I had made the right decision. I mean, if I failed, all my efforts would have been for nothing. I would have wasted time, a lot of money, and I'd have to start all over, doing something else, and I was not a spring chicken at this point. So over the next 4 years of school, I crammed my schedule with as many courses I thought would help me pass the bar. So after the short-lived achievement of law school graduation, I started, like most law school grads, preparing with these classes. I took 6 weeks off from work. I would study 15 hours a day. It was all I did. It was all I thought about. I even had a uncle who died, and I decided not to go to his funeral because it was out of state and it was going to take too much time. It was really all consuming. It was all I did. So the test comes and the anxiety didn't let up. I was shaking, my hands were shaking as I was writing the essays. And I remember running into someone from my school and I said, "Oh, well, I'm gonna fail. I'll be here in February." So when the results came out in November, imagine how disappointed I was that I actually failed. And I'm like, okay, well, my prediction was true. Let me start studying for the February one. Except this time it was different. To me, there was no sympathy. You know, I had failed. There would be less people accommodating me. I could only take 2 weeks off from work, and I signed up for some other bar class that was a waste because there was a subway strike. And I remember also getting sick, like this weird swollen glands in my neck. And I was like, okay, I went to the clinic and I'm studying, and the doctor comes in the room, looks at me, says nothing, and walks out. I'm like, oh, great, now I'm dying too. So it was 2 days before the exam, and I'm sitting there and I'm feeling defeated, and I'm just like, I just want to quit. I don't want to do this. And that was when this wave of, oh, whatever, like, whatever. I already paid for the test. This is just going to be a practice. I'm just going to go. So, armed with my peppermint tea and my is what it is attitude, I went and I took the test. I was at work a couple months later, and I'm like, oh, you know, I should probably look up when the results are going to be out. And as I did, I was like, there was a link there, and it was like, they're available now. I was like, oh. So after a second, I put my name in, and there on the screen was the New York State Bar Examiners congratulating me on passing the bar exam. Thank you. And after a moment of complete shock, I ran and I told everybody. But that, thinking about it now and even thinking about it right now, that fear that I had all those years was real. It was like a wall, constantly, just having to try to go through it to get somewhere. And I can identify that now as this fear of failing, and how many times it kept me from actually succeeding. And I know it wasn't the first time, it wasn't the last time, and it probably will not be the final time that this is going to happen to me. But now at least I know that once I'm ready to let go of my fear, in the end, everything works out for me.
Well done. That was great. Love it. Thank you, Melanie. All right, so the next daring audience member to tell a story for us tonight. Drum roll, please. These Post-its are tricky. Eric E. Mr. Eden. Love this guy.
Hey. All right. Fear, right? I heard about the name in the hat thing just, this afternoon or whatever. I said, oh, that sounds like it might be fun. So totally unprepared. I was going to tell you guys about the time when myself and a bunch of other teenagers climbed down the face of giant ledge, which is like this, without any technical gear, no intention of doing it, and we all nearly died. But by then I already knew that I was mortal. So I'll tell you about, instead, really quickly, the story of how I learned I was mortal. So when you're a kid, you know, you're gonna live forever, right? Or at least that was my attitude. And we were very active kids. I used to hitchhike with friends, with a friend, or different groups of friends, out to Montauk. I was growing up in Huntington Station, and this one friend of mine and I, we went. It was Easter break. I don't know how old we were. Maybe it was 8th grade or something, or 9th grade, and we went out to Montauk, and we went hiking into the moraines out there, right? And we didn't have any gear really. You know, we were sleeping under a drop cloth, and we had an old holy blanket with a sheet on it for, sleeping bag, and we had cans of Spam that, you build a fire, you poke a hole in it, you throw it in there, and a flame shoots out, and you pull it out, and you open it up when it cools off. Anyway, and it starts raining, and so we go back out to the highway, but nobody's out there. And nobody's picking up, the cars going by, they're not picking up these 2 soaked dogs, right? So we said, okay, we'll go camp the night. And it turned to freezing rain and actually started snowing. So now everything's soaking wet. There's no dry firewood. It's, what do we do? So we collected birch bark and whatever we could. And we had a big lighter with us. That was like our lifesaver. And I'm trying, my finger's so cold. I couldn't get the spark to do it. And we're gonna go, okay, this is it. We're gonna die, So we both climb under the blankets. We put his blankets over my blankets, and we're huddled together. Then I had this brilliant idea. We have a first aid kit with us. I don't know why we did. We didn't always, but we did. And I said, there's an alcohol pad in there, and alcohol is flammable. So we dig in there, and freezing cold hands and soaking wet. And I have like jeans on. It's not like I have a fleece and no, I'm t-shirt, soaking, freezing. And I make a little X in this little alcohol white pad, open it up, and I got the pick out, and I got it close, and I got enough of a little spark, and we got a flame. And then we started putting stuff in it, and he's running around collecting wood, and I'm feeding it in very carefully and slowly, and we got this big old fire going, and we kept feeding it, and we put our clothes all around it. I burned a hole in my jeans. I melted my sneakers. Yes, sneakers. And we made it through the night. It was a beautiful sunny day the next day. We packed up whatever, and we went back out, and somebody picked us up, and we told them our story, and they took us home and fed us breakfast. So that's my story. And that's how I discovered I was mortal.
That was an adventure. All right, so our third name of the hat here, our storyteller is Marcus K. Luck struck with you here.
Hello. So early in my career, I had to commute a long distance to work. Usually it was about an hour and a half. So take the train from Northport, get into the city, and then trek down to Lower Manhattan. At the time, I had my favorite device, which was a Sony Walkman, bright yellow. So I would listen to the radio. Some of you remember that. Listen to the radio. Sometimes I'd listen to the tape, but mostly the radio. So every commute was mostly the same, mostly boring, to go to work and then do that whole routine over again. So I get to the office. I go to the 13th floor, which is where the cafeteria was. I'm ordering food, and there's a loud explosion, or loud sound rather. Wasn't quite sure what it was. Everyone moves to the windows to try to reconcile the sound with what they think they see. I do the same. So I walk to the window. There's an unobstructed view of a building with a large hole. So I move from that 13th floor back to the 9th floor where I worked. I was an institutional equity trader. I worked on Wall Street. So we have the business news channel on. People are still commuting coming into the office, they're describing what they think they saw or what they think they experienced, part of which includes, I think I saw a small plane. We're now starting to see imagery on the business news channels of what's going on in Lower Manhattan. We're getting phone calls from our European customers asking what's happening in New York City. So from there, Frank, who is the manager and the CEO of our department, he came out and said, everyone remain calm. We're going to listen to the emergency instructions from the facilities, and we're going to evacuate when they give us the call to evacuate. So that call comes quickly. It comes when the first tower is falling and the debris encompasses my building. So we run up north, up the West Side Highway, as far north as the last emergency vehicle. We think it's safe. So I'm with 2 or 3 other people. We had broken up into teams. So we get there, we pause, we turn around, and then we can see the remaining tower that's still there. And so now I first hear a large sound, then I experience the fear in the office and how we're evacuating. Everyone kind of goes in different directions. So as I'm looking at the tower, I see things my brain can't fully process. It's the sounds, the emergency vehicles, a lot of chaos, but everyone's looking at the building that's still standing. So the only thing that really sticks out in my mind from that moment is I see what I perceive to be jackets. And I'm like, why are there jackets kind of floating against the backdrop of the building? So it takes my mind a moment to catch up and connect. There's people in those jackets. But like I said, I couldn't really understand what I was seeing. So from there, we continue north because we think it's going to continue to be unsafe. I have my Walkman on. So now I'm listening to the radio the first time since, and up until that time and since then, I've ever heard the emergency broadcast system being used. They're making announcements. If you're off duty NYPD, if you're FDNY, emergency services, and you're off duty, you're now back, you're being called to service. Your city needs you. So we have to make certain decisions, the group I'm with, which is to find a way to connect with people that are thinking about us, our families. So my colleague John, he knows of a bar on the west side of Manhattan. He's like, they have a payphone. I'm like, fantastic, a payphone. So we go there. It's a little bit crowded. Everyone's online making these phone calls. So I call my parents. I call my wife's parents. And Kim, she was a flight attendant. Now I'm hearing the announcements that all air traffic is being grounded. So I'm in history, but I'm also experiencing the information kind of being shared. But I was not fearful for her because her plane was set to fly from California back to New York later in the day. So from there, all of New York is closed. You can't get in or out on the bridge or the trains. So I have to essentially wait until Penn Station reopens. When I do, when Penn Station reopens, I get on the train, I have a notebook, I write down everything I saw, felt, and understood in my notebook. And I didn't read it for several years. Then I misplaced the book, which is a different story, but I found it again. And when my kids got older, or old enough, then I read the story to them. That's probably the first time I read it. And only recently, within the past 2 years, I went to the museum because I wasn't quite sure how to reconcile my experience with my feelings about that day. So went to the museum with Kim and Dylan, my youngest, and then we went back to that same bar where that had that payphone, just to kind of connect it all together. And yeah, well, that's my story. Thank you.
All right. Wow, that was very powerful. Thank you for sharing that, Marcus. Okay, I'm gonna move on to our fourth lucky storyteller, Gina C. Gina C, is she here? Going once? No Gina. Okay, she must have left.
She's afraid she left.
That was funny. Like that. Okay, Anne. Oh, she got afraid. That's right. We've all been there. Okay. All right, let's see. Next one. Well, you put your name in there. I mean, I didn't make it. All right, Kelly S. Kelly S. She left. All right. All these like potential stories, but okay. Tashari. Come on up, Tashari.
Thank you. Oh yeah. Yeah, I don't know how you do that. It's just movable. There we go. Hello everyone. My name's Tashari. I'm gonna share my experience being homeless for almost a year. I left my adopted mother's house when I was, what was it, like August 24? And I left because, I knew that I was in her house and, she's the parent and you abide by the parent's rules, But it just went against my spiritual beliefs. And there was just, a lot of tension and a lot of stuff happening. And I had also felt like a lot of being unwanted, rejection, abandonment, all that fun stuff. And like I said, really just against my spiritual beliefs. And, I just was like, okay, I understand where I'm at. It is what it is. And I decided to leave August 1st. I had no idea where I was going to go. But I packed my things up, and I have a really strong belief in God and just have seen how he's come through. And just was like, we're just going to take it as it is. And I worked in Huntington, and I knew a couple people in Huntington, so I'd called them up and asked them if, I could stay there for a little bit until I figured things out. So a church member, she let me stay with her. That ended up being around like 4 months. And just during the whole process of being in people's house, moving from place to place, I just learned a lot about the people, just people in general, and, a lot about myself. But this first home that I stayed in, every place was great. I learned a lesson from everywhere. I would do it again because I'm here today, and without that, I wouldn't have been here. But the first place that I stayed at, learned great things, cooking, being out on my own for like the first time. Great. However, this church member, she had a husband who made me feel a little bit uncomfortable. And I had a lot of fear of like, how do you speak about that? Or being in like a position of, like being taken advantage of, right? So being there, I learned, like what it feels for people in those circumstances, how it could be really hard to open up and just, face that. And I was also in a place of, learning boundaries and everything. So, as each, little touch happened or, situation happened, I learned to stand up for myself. So there was a time where, a certain touch had happened and I not yelled, but, was like, don't touch me. And I guess that made him uncomfortable. And then he spoke to his wife and said that, he didn't feel comfortable in his house anymore. He can't be playful. Wow, it's been 3 minutes already. But she had a talk with me and she said that I had to go. And, that was very hurtful, just for me, just because, I felt like, I stood up for myself and these are like the consequences, right? But, standing up for yourself and
believing in what you believe in, it comes at a risk, right? So I knew that this was something that was good for me, but it felt also like it was a consequence of, standing up for myself. So I left there. I believe I went to a cousin's house after, stayed there for a little bit, ran up my time there. Eventually moved to another person's house. I actually got to move to my biological mother's house, which is something that you don't really get to experience as an adoptive child. And that was great as well. Every place I went to had its hardship, but again, overall, the lessons that I learned, it was very good. So there, I felt not so much a connection with her per se, but just more about my story or about me, feeling like, okay, I see where this comes from. Like, because being adopted in my home, there's all these things that I'm going through, but I'm the only one. So it's kind of like, what's wrong with me, or where is this coming from? But being there, I actually got to see that a lot of this just is in the bloodline. And, I got to see like the traumas and, her traumas that she went through as well. Ended up leaving there. That night was, the day I left there was also interesting. She had wanted to live together, but again, it just didn't align with what I believed in. And I had told her no, and she had got angry and kicked me out that night, forcibly told me to get out and saying all these horrible things. And that was hard as well. I left there not knowing where I was gonna go again. Called a friend up, she helped me. Long story short, I'm going through place to place. And in the process, it, kind of made me think about, is this what it was like when I was younger? There was a big part of me that didn't remember what it was like going through foster home to foster home to foster home. So it's like you keep leaving without having a sense of peace or a sense of like fear of what's gonna happen next, where am I gonna go? But like I said, I have a very strong faith, and God has always showed up. And I was homeless for almost like 8-9 months, and not a day did I go by sleeping on the street. I always had food. There was always a place to shelter. So it really taught me what I am capable of and how much I can endure. Something I wouldn't have thought to put myself in, but overall it showed me what it needed. And I think my time is up, but I'm here now. I learned a lot of lessons. I'm very grateful. Again, I would do it again. And I'm in a season of my life where I am overcoming fear and just making sure and just know that I don't want to be how I've seen other people around me, living in fear, always afraid of what's happening next, or afraid to not move, or, be an adult, 60 years old and not living their life, and it's always been hard, being so bold and so active. People always having their share to say about, oh, you shouldn't be doing this or don't do that. But I know that where I'm at, I don't want to live according to other people's, fears or standards. And I don't want to live a life saying, I wish, shoulda, coulda, woulda. So yeah, transformation. I have been transformed. I have a good positive light on life, and I'm gonna keep going. And thanks for listening to my talk.
These stories are blowing me away. Unexpected treasures. Beautiful. Thank you for your courage, and I just find that to be so generous that you just came up here and shared that with us. So thank you. All right, so our last lucky storyteller, perhaps, Diana M. Yay! I saw your friend. She was like, yeah, you can move. The mic is movable, right?
Okay.
So whatever like height works for you?
I thought there was going to be like a "do you wanna" part, and that's not. Okay.
No, yeah.
I'm going to try to be efficient here. I have a little bit of time blindness, so I'm going to look over for some cues. So this is a short story about giving fear a name. I really like fear. Fear is a friend of mine. I've never done anything great without a lot of fear in like the depths of my soul. As far as names go, one of my best and most fearful decisions was naming my daughter. I was about 7 months pregnant and had really thought about naming her Elisa, which is my birth name. It's the name on a Colombian birth certificate that I'd paid a lot of attention to for many years. And when I was diagnosed with severe preeclampsia and admitted to the hospital, I said, I don't want Elisa to be a baby that ends up dead. And I can't give that name to a future dead baby. So let's look at the other contenders. And we really love the name Mila. And we were on the fence about her middle name. And we were looking at Hope, and we were looking at Harper. And when I was on the operating table, and the anesthesiologist said, I'm gonna have to cut your wedding band off because I really think your hands are, they're pretty swollen and it might just, really hurt your finger and this is really dangerous. And I said, you're not gonna cut my fucking wedding band off. I can't imagine being more swollen than I am right now. You're gonna leave it. And the anesthesiologist said, I am going to leave it. Okay, fine. So Mila was born silent, and for 90 seconds, my poor husband had the wonderful view of the entire NICU team trying to get her to breathe. And I didn't see her, but I was very, very, very calm because I told you fear is my friend. Very calm, and I looked at him, and I said, from the depths of me, I looked and I said, this is not the story. This is not what is going to happen, and she will be fine. Just as I knew when they put the stupid monitor on me and said, drink this apple juice you've been avoiding your entire pregnancy. Drink this. We got to perk her up. We have to make sure she's fine. And I said, she is fine. I know she's fine. You're making her not fine right now. And I looked at my husband and he watched, and finally, you hear that sound that you are praying for, and she started to cry. And a very, very feeble little cry. And I said to my husband, well, the middle name we're going to go with now. He said, yes, it's going to be Hope. So there was Mila Hope and how she became herself. Let's fast forward a couple years later. I just started a job working on Rikers. Didn't really know that the pandemic was going to start 3 months later. We were trying for our second. And it probably kind of a bad decision if you wouldn't knowingly step into a job in jail in your second pregnancy during a pandemic. But there we were, and I was pregnant with a boy, and I had always dreamt of naming my son Thomas. That's my father's name. And here I am again. Well, shit. I'm pregnant during a pandemic. I'm in jail, and I've got this really great name I've been counting on. I really don't want to give Thomas to a dead baby. So I looked at my husband and we said, well, what could we name our boy? And we said, well, there's Batman. He's pretty tough. Springsteen, also very tough. Hornsby. Banner. We're naming him Bruce. So we named our boy Bruce, and he came out with the exact birth that we needed following that first one. And about a year ago, he was dealing with the fact that my dad, Thomas, had been recovering from a pretty significant surgery to remove cancer next to his brain and in his ear. Essentially had to have a mastectomy of the ear. That's the best analogy I can come up with. And Bruce is very close to Tom. And his preschool teacher called me and said, Bruce lost center time because he's been trying to bring leaves into the school. Okay, well, I don't know, that's weird, but okay, I understand. Rules are rules. So that night, we're laying next to each other, and I said, Bruce, what's going on? Like, why are you trying to bring leaves into the school? He said, well, you know, the leaves are dead. And I feel like if I let go of the leaves, that they're going to disappear, and I will never be able to get them back. And I said, okay, are you worrying about anything? And he was holding his teddy. And I said, can I talk to Teddy? And he holds up Teddy, and I said, Teddy, are you okay? And he said, I'm afraid Grandpa's gonna die. And I said, okay, tomorrow when you go to school, if you have a pile of leaves, we're gonna find a place in the playground. Where is it gonna be? And he said, well, there's a corner. And I said, okay, you're allowed to collect those leaves, but I want you to put those leaves in a special place. And you can put every leaf you find. You don't have to stop collecting leaves. You're going to put them in that place in the playground. And you can always put them there. And so he said, okay, thank you, Mama. And so then he was fine. And he had a place to put his fear. And I gave him a name that let him do that. And now we have our front table in front of our house is a humongous pile of leaves. And I feel so much better about fear, and I still believe that fear is still my friend, and we're still doing just fine. Thank you.
It's fearful of losing the phone.
All right, so that is a wrap. I am just going to ask, I want to get a picture with the storytellers. I mean, like all the storytellers, the first half and the second half. You guys want to come up and we'll just get a quick group shot. Please. Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you.